Our first speaker, Des Joplin, is Des Joplin. Des is the CEO of AIA. She helps her clients cast vision, scale their organizations, and build strong brand identities. She helps businesses think beyond the what to infuse the why into their marketing and business strategies. Under her leadership, AIA Design strives to make marketing the easiest part of running your business. Des, would you please introduce the rest of your colleagues and begin the discussion?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm hoping that you have had a little bit of time to walk off your after lunch grogginess and that we can all have a really fascinating conversation about the power of storytelling. So I'm going to be kicking us off with a two-part session. All right, so this first part is going to be me sharing a little bit more about storytelling. I'm going to walk you guys through a framework on how to apply storytelling into talking about the work that you do. And then I'm going to invite my friends and colleague up to share in a panel discussion where we talk a little bit more boots on the ground, how to apply it in real life. Does that sound like a good plan to all of you guys? Yeah? Awesome. Okay, so starting out, I know you're going to love this content. Okay, so before you're stuck taking pictures of the screen, every time I say something that you think is great, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and download the presentation. And if you're not convinced you're going to love it, no worries, I will show this again at the end. But I'll give you a minute to download and then we'll dig into the topic. Okay, I think we got cameras down. Again, I'll show this again if you need it, so don't worry if you missed your shot. Okay, so in this session, we're going to be going through a lot of things, and I'm going to walk you through those learning objectives for today. So first, you're going to learn why you should leverage storytelling as a strategy to win more work. Who wants to win more work? Everyone? I hope so. That's why we're all here, right? Number two, we're going to talk about the basic structure and proven framework that will help you foster deeper client relationships. Who wants deeper client relationships? Everybody in the room? And then we're going to give some practical insights on how you can apply storytelling through mixed media to bring your projects to life. And lastly, how you can operationalize storytelling in your firm to consistently craft and share those stories. So I want to start out with something that we typically hear firms talk about, right? Some of these might feel familiar to you, and maybe they don't, but we're going to dig into them anyways. So you're saying all the right things, but for whatever reason, people still don't get it. They don't understand who you are, they don't understand what you do, there's something that's disconnecting. You walk out of an interview or a pitch and ask, did I just bore them? Did they care about what I had to say? Am I missing something in the way I'm delivering my message? Your proposals get overlooked even though you're the best fit for the project. Or you're doing great work, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't seem to be landing with your audience. Well, the problem isn't your work. It's how you're talking about it. So we're going to be digging into that today. Some common reasons we see this, we have gone through many interviews with clients, read probably thousands of project descriptions, and many other business forms of written and oral content. And these are the themes that we see pop up as a common issue that creates some of those problems. One is you're talking about yourself too much. How many of you have been in a conversation with someone who just goes on and on and on and on about how great they are and all the accomplishments they've had? Who wants to stay in that conversation? No one, right? Number two, very similarly, you're not speaking directly to your audience. So I'm going to tell you right now, I am not a sports fan. So if any of you come up to me and start talking about your favorite football team, I'll nod my head, pretend that I actually care, and then move on, right? You're not speaking the language of what actually matters to me. You're overemphasizing project details that your audience might not actually care about. It matters to you, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it might not be the topic that people are caring for. You're making your audience think too hard. One of my favorite words is archespeak, right? We use that language and no one knows what you're actually talking about, but it matters again to you, not necessarily your audience. Or you're not sharing the impact or value your client received from the work you did. So what does your audience really want to know? If they don't want to hear you talk about yourself constantly, they don't want to hear the architect speak, they don't want all of these things, what is it that they want? They want to know, do you really understand their problem? Do you empathize with the situation that they're in and the challenge that they're facing? Because every client has a problem they're hoping to solve, otherwise they wouldn't be hiring you, right? They want to know, can you help them solve it? Not just do you understand it, but can you do the work you're saying you're going to do? Does your solution increase revenue, decrease costs, or mitigate risk? We're going to talk about this a little bit in the panel discussion, but all business-to-business decisions really boil down to these three ideas. These are called business drivers. And then lastly, they want to know, can you prove it to them? Most people jump to this before they go through any of the other pieces. And if you haven't credentialed yourself, you haven't set up the fact that you understand their problem, then this just turns into a gloating moment, right? And that's where it becomes unappealing. So it's time to flip the script. We want you to move away from only talking about facts, details, data, information, and basic descriptions to talking about story. It's not that those things aren't important and that they can't add to a story, but they're not the core narrative. So I'm going to dig a little bit into the psychology of storytelling, because I can tell you all day how great I think it is, but if there isn't any science to back it up, that's not all that helpful. So first is it sparks connection. Storytelling increases oxytocin levels, making us feel trust, empathy, and emotional connection. Even the cutthroat developer has emotional connection that they want to gain, right? They have hope, they have visions, they have aspirations for things they want to accomplish. It helps you become unforgettable by tapping into your implicit and explicit memories. Implicit is really your ability to imagine things, and then the explicit is how we start to sequence and categorize based on experiences we've seen in the past. And both of these things help messages become embedded in our mind, right? My husband and his siblings can quote movies back and forth to each other. They have entire conversations based on movies, right? But if I send him to the grocery store and ask him to pick up milk, more than likely he's gonna call me and say, what was I supposed to pick up again, right? Why is that? It's because stories, for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, obviously because of the science behind it, embeds those messages in our minds. It simplifies the complex. So again, using that pattern recognition system in our brain, it allows us to start to understand things that might be foreign, right? That's why parables or analogies are so effective, because it takes something that's abstract and then compares it to something that's similar. And all of a sudden, we can understand a complex idea. It hooks your audience. This is a really important one, and one of the things you want to do right in the beginning of a story, because it makes people want to lean in and say, I'm not going to stop listening until I hear the ending of this story. And so it creates that tension and anticipation. And then it drives action, right? This is the ultimate outcome of anything we're trying to do in our businesses and our work, is we want people to take action. We want them to buy from us. We want them to agree with our design ideas. We want them to take some form of action. And so stories create what we call an open story loop, right? You want to wait until you have the ending. And especially if it's something that you connect with, then you want to create that same ending in your own life, and it's going to increase action. I love this quote from Nancy Duarte. I don't know if any of you are familiar with her, but she's an amazing thought leader on the topic of storytelling. She's written books about how to engage storytelling in presentations. And she says stories are the most powerful delivery tool for information, more powerful and enduring than any art form. And we see this to be true, right? There's stories that have been passed on from generation to generation. It leaves a lasting impact. But you might be asking, okay, great, I understand storytelling's amazing, but does it actually impact the bottom line? Does it actually create value? Well, these two guys you see up here, Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn, asked the same question. Can storytelling increase value? And they did this fascinating experiment where they purchased 100 insignificant objects from garage sales, for under $3 a piece. And then they tapped into their narrative network. They're both bloggers and authors, have written in the New York Times and multiple other places. And they said, okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these objects, we're gonna write narratives about them, fictitious, and we're gonna sell them on eBay and see what they go for. And it was pretty amazing what happened. So here is an example of 4 of the many items that they did this with. I don't know about you, but I love that little egg whisk, and I would spend lots of money on that, right? No one would buy these things for a lot of money, and they didn't, right? So the original prices, you can see left to right, $1.99, $2.99, the egg beater was 25 cents. But what was interesting is the narratives changed the whole thing, right? So you've got some of these selling for $31, $30. One item, which I don't have featured here, they purchased for $1 and sold for $109. It's pretty significant. They sold all of the items for a total of $8,000. And for all of my math friends out there, that is a 2,799% increase in market value. I'd say that's pretty significant. That's the power of storytelling. So I'm going to switch gears into structure, all right? And for any of my anti-English fans, don't worry, I am not going to get into all of the details of plot structures and so forth. But I do want to make the point here that storytelling is an age-old principle. It has been studied since the dawn of time, and I am not trying to reinvent it to you. I'm going to pull a lot of information from the things that I've studied, my team has studied, having countless conversations with leaders who are challenged with this, pulling from other thought leaders who have also studied this topic. And I just want to give you a very simple way to apply storytelling in the work that you do. So there are 7 archetypes that tap into the implicit, explicit memory systems I was telling you about a little bit earlier, that also achieve dopamine by giving some unexpected events. So I'm going to talk through those a little bit. There are 4 of these that are more common for the architecture space. That does not mean that all of them can't be used. They just might show up a little bit more often. So I'm going to walk through what these are and then give a couple of examples of how you might share a story that's relevant to that topic. So the first one, overcoming the monster. This is where a hero must conquer some sort of evil force, typically physical in most stories, but I don't think you guys are beating people up. Sometimes it's metaphysical, and that's where it would apply to you. So an example of this might be a community-focused project that's intent is to overcome some form of injustice, right? Some of the projects that Walter Hood was talking about this morning would fall into the overcoming the monster category. Rags to riches, which is also, again, one of those less common ones but can show up, is where a poor or derelict main character gains something they lack, money, power, love, loses it, and then has to win it back again at the end of the story. So an example of this might be a neglected historic building that wins major funding and a lot of publicity. For whatever reason, they lose all the funding, and then a design solution helps bring it back to life. Right? So that might be a rags to riches, and I'm sure there's many others that could fall in that category. The quest, which is the main character must reach a certain location, attain a certain objective, or fulfill a certain goal while conquering many obstacles along the way. So in this one is the client might have a goal, heads in beds by spring, turn a profit by Q4, and of course there are many things that happen along the way, and then in the end they have this great ending. This is probably the most common one that you would see in the architecture space. The voyage and return. So this one's a little bit different because this one might more apply to you as a personal brand and how you're going to think about how your story actually matters. And so this is where a protagonist is sent into a strange land from which they will return armed with wisdom and life experience, right? So think about your experience going to architecture school, or maybe you had an unexpected career path where you joined multiple industries and now all of a sudden that has impacted the way that you do your work. A comedy, everybody knows to a degree what a comedy is, and so a way you could apply this is, let's say it's a workplace project, and the client has a really quirky company culture. Maybe you weave some Easter eggs into the story about how they named their conference room something really silly. There's ways to use comedy in your work as well. Tragedy, right? Who wants a bad ending to your work? No one does, but this can be a very effective tool used in the right environment. This is definitely not something you would want to post all over social media or have on your website. But when you're talking to a client about a challenge that they're facing that they might not understand, sometimes actually sharing a story about a client who didn't take your advice and the ending that they had can be very impactful because they understand why they should listen to you, right? And so tragedy actually does have a place in certain environments. And then the last one is a rebirth, which is a protagonist experience as a moment of reckoning that forces them to confront past failures and innovations, etc. So this might be what a similar story to the beginning one. What happens when someone? Oh, I'm sorry. But the rebirth one is you might have something where you run into an issue and there's a derelict building that's been completely neglected, and then all of a sudden has a new story coming forward. So now that you've heard about the archetypes, question is, who is the hero? Any guesses in the room? The client. The client is the hero. But too often stories are told as you are the hero, the architect. You're not the hero, you're the guide, okay? The guide has a very important role though. Right? Yoda is significant in the story. He's the one with the wisdom. He's the one who's coaching. He's the one who's guiding. But your client is the hero. And the reason why this is so significant is because too often we tell stories again as if we're the person who's the hero, but people don't relate to that. People want to imagine themselves as the hero and start to say, I want that same outcome. And so it's about making your audience the center of the story. Another great quote from Chad Hodge, who's from Harvard Business Review. He says, we should help people to see themselves as the hero of the story, whether the plot involves beating up the bad guys or achieving some great business objective. Everyone wants to be a star, or at least to feel that the story is talking to or about him personally. So we're going to go into applying storytelling principles now that you understand a little bit of the archetypes, you understand why it's important. We want to make sure that we start with the problem, not the final product. What was the problem the client faced, not starting the conversation immediately with talking about the building that was designed. We're going to keep the client the hero of the story. You'll hear me say it a million times, and you'll probably hear us talk about it again in the panel. Back up your position as the guide. Just because you're not the hero doesn't mean that you can't talk about yourself at all. It's just about the placement, right? Putting more emphasis on the client and then secondarily talking about your role and the backup there. Share relevant details, but cut the rest. When you're sharing a story, getting into the weeds of every small thing actually distracts from the larger narrative. So while sometimes details can help emphasize a certain point, and they're not always bad, only include the things that are super relevant and then cut the rest. Don't make your audience think too much, right? Sometimes we make assumptions about what they know or that they're going to be able to figure out what an idea means. Connect the dots for them. And then close with value and impact, okay? Key takeaway here. So I'm going to share this framework with you that you can apply to talking about your projects in many ways, okay? This is from Don, I'll go through each of them here in a second. Anybody familiar with Don Miller? He's another great thought leader on storytelling. He writes a book called Story Brand. But this is his framework, so I'm not gonna take credit for it. But I do wanna talk through how it applies specifically to this space. So first is we wanna start with a hero. Again, the hero is the most important person in the story. A hero who wants or needs something. They have a vision, they have something they're trying to accomplish. But then they encounter a problem that they have to solve. Then you show up, the architect, to help them solve it. But you show that you understand their problems, their fears. You've seen it a million times, right? You've got the wisdom and the experience to help them get through the problem that they're facing. And then you give them a plan. This is where the design process comes into the picture. So you've done a couple of things before you get there. This is where you talk about the plan that you created that helps them figure out how to overcome this problem. With positive and negative stakes, right? So a lot of people avoid this point. There's only positive that can come out of this. But what if it failed? It allows people to share and understand the fear that can come from, oh my gosh, I hope they're gonna make it at the end, right? That's the thing that gets us excited in a story. Then calls them to action. So there's something that's being asked of them to do. They have to make some sort of decision, move forward in some sort of way, and then ultimately lands with a better world. The problem is solved, right? So this is a framework that you can apply in all of your project narratives, but you can also apply this in any other form of content. You can apply it to presentations. You can apply this to cover letters for proposals. I mean, it's something that can be used over and over again. So I'm going to give one more point on this, actually, is all of these things are important. But the reality is that you are not always going to be able to fit all of these things into a short conversation or a small project description, let's say in a proposal where you have a word count. And so if you're going to take nothing else away from this, the 4 and the chartreuse color are the most critical things. In every story, you must have these in order to have someone stay engaged. So I'm going to give a quick example of what this might look like in practice. So here's an example of a typical project description. And for the sake of time, I am not going to read this to you. Again, you can have a copy of the presentation if you want to dig into it more. But a little fun exercise that we do is take the description and highlight based on that framework where it shows up. So you'll see here, this is about basic architecture firm, which none of you guys want to be, and how they write their project descriptions. So as you'll see here, they really start by talking about the guide themselves, which flips the script for them being the hero. They have very little information about the hero, who's the client, a little bit of the plan, and a little bit of the better world. But what is everything else? It's noise. It's not actually telling a story. So when we look at this and we say, this is either a project description or it's a project story, and which one is going to land with your clients better? So I took this project description and rewrote it using the same principle. Again, not going to read the whole thing to you for the sake of time, but I want to show you the color difference here. You've got a whole plethora rainbow of color on here, and every bit of it, except for like one line, has meaning and impact, reason for being in this description. You see there's a ton of yellow, which is important. You can't really tell on the screen the difference between the yellow and the chartreuse at the end, so forgive me for that. But there's a lot in here that's yellow, which means it's focused on the hero as the client. And then you can go through each of these and understand how they all apply. But this is a story, again, not a project description. So we're going to switch into our panel conversation now. But again, if you did not get a picture of or if you didn't get to download the presentation in the beginning, here's your opportunity. I'll give you a quick second, and then we will transition into our panel. All right. Well, thank you for hearing me talk about storytelling for a little bit. Obviously something that I care very much about, but I've also invited some fellow storytellers up to continue the conversation with me. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to my friends up here. So I've got Ryan Timms, who's co-founder of Press Record. Ryan is an award-winning filmmaker and the co-founder of Press Record, obviously. With over a decade of experience directing branded films, Ryan helps organizations build authentic human connection through cinematic storytelling. His work has taken him across the country, capturing raw emotional narratives that cut through corporate noise and leave lasting impact. At the heart of every project is a simple belief: people don't connect with brands, they connect with stories. Then we have Will Stroud, who is also co-founder of PressRec. And as co-founder, he works with clients from tech startups to Fortune 500 companies to craft authentic, impactful videos that elevate brand identity and resonate deeply with viewers. Whether it's a heartfelt testimonial, a behind-the-scenes documentary, or a high-energy commercial, Will leads a passionate team who uncovers the unique stories within a brand, its people, and its client, and translates them into compelling content that drives engagement and loyalty. And actually, some of their team is here, if we want to give a quick shout out to the PressRec team who are also recording this. And then last but not least, I have Caitlin L'Italian. So Caitlin is on my team, and she's the operational engine behind what we do. Her strength lies in creating order out of complexity, aligning strategy with execution to ensure marketing efforts are measurable, scalable, and integrated into broader business goals. She has built and optimized operational frameworks for nationally recognized firms, leading everything from CRM, knowledge management systems, to developing processes and workflows that make capturing stories easier and embedded in firm culture. So, thank you guys for joining me. I'm multitasking here, guys, so you're gonna have to work with me. Kidding. So if you want to connect with either of us, we'll have these QR codes up here for you, PressRec and us, and I'm just going to leave them for you. So I'm going to start out with the first question for you guys. What are some underutilized approaches to storytelling that may be happening in other spaces?
Check. Yeah, so leave it to the video guys to say that video is probably underutilized, right? But one thing I will mention, how many of the people in here, the firms in here, would say that you get maybe more than 50% of your work from referrals or from your customers? More than half. A good number in here, right? So who are your best salespeople? It's probably your customers and their stories, the stories where you help them to achieve their goals. And I think in a lot of proposals and a lot of projects that we see from architects and other firms, that you guys are sort of neglecting that story. And so just to draw attention to a lot of what Dez's points were about, your customers being the hero, putting them center stage can really help differentiate what you did for them and then help new prospects and clients see themselves in those scenarios.
Yeah, it's great to be back in Asheville. Shout out to Aspire. This is a great city, so we're excited to be here. But yeah, just to pick up on Ryan's points, that was such a great analogy, Des, about the Yodas and the Lukes. So you guys are the Yodas, you guys are the guides, you guys are the masters, you're the experts in the field here. And what you're creating is something beautiful. And you're dealing with a client that's like Luke. He's young and stubborn, needs a lot of help. So it's up to you guys to kind of guide them through that process and make it as smooth as possible to get the best outcome for the client. You guys design with purpose and intent, and you guys are empathetic to your end user, and that story deserves to be told. So we'd like to encourage everybody to think about what your superpowers are and how to tell that story.
The other thing that I think is important, and we're as guilty of it as everyone in this room, right? Projects are the easiest thing to use as an example for storytelling. It's what you create, it's your day-to-day. But the outside of the industry, the other either professional service firms or other B2B spaces that we look at are leveraging storytelling above and beyond just the product, right, that they're creating. So they're using it to talk through their brand from a recruiting standpoint to attract and retain key clients. Key team members. And they're using it to help build the cultures that they want, the values that they share, right? What their vision is. They are communicating that as well to the market to find alignment with like companies. And so it is a wonderful practice to do it for your projects, highly recommend it. But think about the other areas that potential clients or even potential team members would want to know about you and understand. The story of how you got started, right? The expertise that specific individuals in your firm have. There's ways to shape that story in multiple facets across of what you do.
I think that's a great segue to this next question, which is, okay, so if we're all telling stories, how do we differentiate, right? It's a framework. We all got it. How do we stand out still while using this type of a framework?
So if you look left and look right where you're sitting, what makes you different from all of the people around you? Ultimately, it is your story and your experiences and the way that you approach the projects that you take on and the work that you do is wholly unique. And, you know, to call back to Walter this morning, the end of his talk was all about differentiating the work through the stories that he told, through the art and the designs that he had. But if you think one layer deeper than that, you know, think about that at the firm level, at the architect level, you know, to Caitlin's point, like, how can you set yourself apart from those sitting next to you? It's your experiences that really make you unique. And if you're not sharing those stories, the buildings can only speak for themselves to some degree, but if you need to be able to shout that from those rooftops.
If you know anything about marketing, you know that brand is one of our favorite things to talk about. It's like, it's the coolest part of marketing in most people's opinions. But brand is really where the differentiation does come in. So let's say, yes, you guys you absorbed all that, you have the framework, you go and you do, and it's beautiful, right? You're starting to tell those stories. But the pieces that you need to infuse into those don't exist in this framework that we had because they're unique to you. So we can't put it up there as a rinse and repeat solution. But how many of you think that the differentiation that your firm brings sounds something along the lines of, we design for people? Because we've heard that a lot when we ask firms, what makes you different? We design for people. That's amazing. Please do not stop doing that. It is very important, so I do not want to devalue that. But if everyone is saying that in the market, you are not different. You are exactly the same then. So you really do need to dig into who you are as a firm, what you're trying to do in the world, why you get up in the morning, right? Are you passionate about the sustainability that you want to bring to the structures that you're working with? Do you want to help reinvigorate communities, right? Are you focused on restoration and the rebirth story? That's how you begin to shape your personal brand story and begin to talk about who you are as a firm, the expertise that you have, and how that is, as a guide, helping Luke, we'll call him Luke, through his journey, right? That's what makes you different. So I would really, I would challenge everyone in this room to go back to their firm and start to look around and say, like, why are we different? Why are we better than firm next door, right? And if it comes down to the design for people, I'm going to ask you to dig in a little further than that.
I think a great analogy with that too, just to play off of the Yoda example is, you know, Star Wars is a totally different story than when we talk about Gandalf. Like, Gandalf is also a guide, but you can tell the difference between them because they're very different in the way that they talk and the way that they show up. And that's the difference between the branding, right? And so when you can still tell a compelling story that follows a similar plot line, but it's infused with nuance and character, and that's really how you do that. How do you make sure the stories are resonating with the audiences, right? How do you make sure that you're speaking to the challenges and the pain points of who you're talking to?
I can start. I'm going to hog the mic. So Des spoke to it a little bit earlier today, and we refer to them as business drivers, but really it's the why behind any decision that your clients make. So if you're in the B2C space, if you're in residential real estate and in residential architecture, apologies, you have more than these three, because the complexity of people and why we purchase things on an individual basis is slightly more nuanced. But in the business-to-business world, everything boils down to three things. You're going to increase your client's revenue. Everybody wants to grow. Everyone wants to make more money so that they can have the impact that they want. You are going to reduce their cost, which I had like this much accounting in school. So what I learned from that is that if I spend less, I make more. So again, it's still about revenue, but it's that cost reduction. And then you're going to help them mitigate risk in the future, right? You're going to help them stay ahead of the curve, plan for the unforeseen. So those are the three things you really sell in terms of end value to your clients. And so when we're talking about resonating, it needs to sound way better than that. Please don't say that in any of your marketing material. But it's really what you're trying to imply, right? Talking about, reinvigorating communities, it's going to bring people back to the area, right? That's infusing revenue into that economy and that market. If you're talking through a solution, Akil was talking about on the podcast yesterday, of facility maintenance and understanding usage to reduce cost over time, right? That's cost savings. That is gold when you're in these conversations. So you need to be sure that all of your stories are kind of pivoting around those points. If you are in residential architecture, you have to add things like aspirational living and lifestyle to it, right? And so there's additional ones past that, which we can chat through a little bit later after. But those are the things that you really need to be making sure that your stories are pivoting around to help them resonate.
On the video side of things, Ryan and I always say good videos are the gift that keeps on giving. And what that really means is good videos are online 24/7. Your sales team is working 8 hours a day, 8-hour shifts. Good videos are accessible, on YouTube, on your website, 24/7, worldwide. So that's something to think about. Another thing I'd like to say is just challenging your way of thinking. A lot of the companies in this room may or may not even have a line item on your marketing budget for video or professional photography. And if you don't, I would say think about reinvesting in your company for a biz dev tool, not so much your marketing budget, because think about creating powerful stories about your firm and how to win more work with your best work. Lean into what your best customer would say about you and sing that from the mountaintops. Your best customer is your best salesman, as Ryan said earlier. That's so true. So think about what your best customer would say about you on video. A lot of you guys probably have written testimonials on your website. Think about how to flip that into a video, even if it's just with your iPhone to start with before you go the professional route. But I really encourage everybody to think about, that's really what resonates in the end, and you're really trying to get more customers by doing these types of projects, and you want to show off your best work to win that new work. So yeah.
And really what that's about is empathy. Developing deeper relationships with your customers is about them being able to kind of see themselves in some of that work. And like, for example, we're covering a mass timber project in Raleigh right now, and it's very important to the customer that this was a mass timber project, and it was up to the architects and the designers involved to source the material, identify who they were going to use, to preach that message that the customer wanted as a part of that. And now that they're commissioning a piece about it, for everybody else who mentions that they want to do mass timber beyond like, oh, it just looks cool, it has so much of a deeper meaning because of the purposes behind this particular client being a life science company and them trying to save lives, not pollute the air that they're putting the lungs into, kind of thing. There's just a lot of ways to bring in empathy into these case studies at a little bit deeper level than statistics and numbers can tell. When you submit proposals in any industry, but particularly in yours, it can be a stack of papers, this thick. How are you really going to stand apart? If your customers are the ones referring a good chunk of your work, put them at the forefront of some of that marketing, and they may be more willing to champion you and help that message, reach further.
Yeah, it boils down to communicating that you understand the challenge and the client's pain point, right? So who are some of the people in this industry who you have noticed are maybe doing this well?
I lost a bet, so she asked me this question. We get asked this constantly when we work with firms, and the answer, sadly, is no one's really killing it, right? It is not, in the spectrum of marketing, right, on your marketing journeys, it's not something that's fully been leveraged to the place that I would say, it's this firm, right? Like they're the gold star and no one else is doing it. What's really interesting is that when we were asked that question back in 2022, I had that deer in headlights look when that came up. But there have been some really interesting shifts that have been happening lately. And we're starting to see some of the leaders in the industry, the Genslers, the Perkins and Will, the they're all HKSs, get that confused. They are starting to leverage some of these principles. It's starting to show up, right? Heavily leveraged outside in the other professional service firm spaces, but not so much in this one. But what that signals to me is that we've reached that tipping point. We're on the other side of it now. And so it is going to become more and more and more common, right? And first to market has the advantage. And so what I think is so important about talking about this now is that there's time, right? Don't get in a situation where you're playing catch up because the rest of the market then is starting to follow. You have this framework, you have the tools, start to leverage this and see how it really can impact your day-to-day, your marketing, your BD conversations, your interviews, and then it'll slowly start to transition. Because I do like to give an example when asked, I usually look at Deloitte, right? Professional service firm, they do consulting. Who knows what that means? I don't. But they do speak to your same clients, right? They speak to the same audience. And so it's a wonderful one to look to say, what is the ideal? Where should we be looking to go in our marketing? And because Destiny was on my side, their webpage that I pulled up on Friday was perfectly aligned. So big top of their webpage, we call it the hero. They say, want to change businesses, change minds. Okay, I get it. It's really, really broad, so it speaks to me. I get it. I have things in the business I want to change. And then underneath it, it says a chip supplier, right? Hero. Not them. They're not a chip supplier. Had a problem with supply chain. Haven't we all? And our team, Guide, worked with them to create a strategy to allow them to keep pace with the market need. Don't quote me on that. That was paraphrasing in the end. But that's a beautiful example of the storytelling framework. They didn't say, Deloitte is amazing and we do consulting, right? They went straight into, this is our client, they had a challenge, and we came along with them, and they're in that better world state. And so start to pay attention to outside of the industry firms and companies that are speaking to your target market, because it's what your clients are going to start to expect from you too.
A slightly different way to reframe the question is, who's killing it right now? Well, honestly, it's a lot of the biotech and the pharma companies around here. Some of the bigger companies in North Carolina, some of the bigger national companies. They're honestly our best clients, and they're the reason we ended up on a lot of these large-scale job sites, which you guys are working on. I imagine a lot of these pharma biotech clients are some of your guys' best clients as well, and we're all kind of lucky enough to ride on those coattails when the jobs come. So yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's like, where is the work? It's a lot of the life sciences space. We're in the middle of RTP is where our studio is, so we're working hard on just staying active in the life sciences network and being tuned in on what projects are happening. There's a lot of new projects happening around RTP, the greater Raleigh-Durham area right now, and we've been lucky enough to get to document some of those projects, so that's been a great learning experience for our team, being on a lot of these large-scale job sites for 12, 16, 18 months, and kind of seeing the progress and getting to document that progress on like a monthly basis. So that's been a great, that's been kind of our biggest win, is just having the I guess the luck to get in there with the right companies that are really active building these new commercial scale projects.
Yeah, it's funny that we all went pretty different directions. I had a totally different idea in who's killing it in this space. We could talk about different firms and the different things that they might be doing, but I think of it more as in what companies are across a lot of different mediums. And maybe that's not just in architecture, but in any space. So is Red Bull an energy drink company or a media company? Because, I mean, what do you see a lot of, right? It's the commercials, it's the extreme stuff. What about Lego? You guys think Lego is a toy company? Or, I mean, they make movies, they make video games. That probably outpaces some of the toys that they make. And I think that because they're willing to think about their brands in these broader, kind of bigger ways, you know, of course, these are household names. It's a little bit different than firms like we might be talking about here, but there's nothing stopping you from having that amount of living rent-free in your customers' heads if you can create good content and be where they are hanging out those messages will resonate, and that will really help any firm, any business stand out.
So some of the folks in here might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great, but it also sounds like a lot of work. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? You can't eat the elephant one bite at a time. It's just getting started that is the trick, and little pieces of this chip away at the whole that then make a big impact. And so it's not always about the first case study or the third case study, or in some cases even the fifth, but it's about beating that drum over and over again and being in front of your customers where they are. That will then continue to build some of that resonation, that brand recall, and ultimately help you stand out from that, those stacks of papers and the proposals I mentioned.
Yeah, it's true. Another way to think about it too is we like to think about, it's hard, a lot of companies when they get started making content, they try to make one video that tells your whole story, and like Ryan says, eat the elephant one bite at a time. And what that really means is if you try to make one video that tells your whole firm story, it could be 10 minutes long, it could be boring, no one's gonna sit through and watch the whole thing. So it's really about kind of reflecting inward on your brand and really understanding your core values, who can speak eloquently about your brand on your team and your customers, and then trying to chip away at that. Start small. Just start. That's really the hardest part, is just getting started, and then kind of finding your brand voice, finding where your content lives and where it performs best. For some of you guys, that might be LinkedIn. For some of you guys, it might be your website or Facebook, wherever. But figure out where your customers are hanging out and make content for that platform, and spread it around as much as you can.
I think one of the other important things to remember is it is a lot of work, right? So let's take the project profile story for an example. So you've completed a project, you've had the ribbon cutting, you have the beautiful photography back, and you're going to sit down, you're going to dedicate time to writing this project narrative, right? This, using the framework. And it is going to take a little bit more effort than it used to. But what do you do with it then, right? I can't tell you how many times we've worked with firms that will then post it to their website, post it on their social media, and then that's it. It's done. It might pop back up in another proposal or in an interview when they're speaking about it as a specific proof point to a new client. But you have wasted time writing this story that, if only everyone went on your website and constantly went through your portfolio to read every word you wrote, but that's just sadly not what happens. Marketing really wouldn't have a job if that was the case. So what we advocate you try to do is think about it through programming, right? I'm going to date myself because when I was a kid, Netflix sent you DVDs to your house, and even before that, I had a TV that had ABC, CBS, NBC, right? And they programmed. So they had their time slots that they had to fill with all of their entertainment, right? And so we stole that word in marketing and we call it programming. And that means you have this project profile, it's the core, it's the chunk of content that you're gonna work with. Your job then is to dissect it. If nothing else, one project profile has to at least give you 3 social posts. That's bare minimum. Beyond that, you should be pulling any relevant factoid out of that project, any client testimonial that you've gotten. You should be pairing something, some key thing, whether it is let's say the collaboration space in an office with the other collaboration spaces you've done in other offices, and writing about how collaboration spaces in offices have changed because of the pandemic, and right? It's the story we've all heard. This one story should disperse across any single client touch point you have. So your website, your social media, any email marketing that you do, any presentation or lecture that you give, any qualifications package, proposal, interview deck, use it again and again and again. And if you're worried that it might look like you only had one project, because I've had that happen before, of no, but that doesn't, we have a full portfolio, we can't talk about that project 10 times. No one is paying that close of attention, except for you. So, and remember, you're living in a world of algorithms that are gatekeeping your content. So just because you post it does not mean your audience sees it. So repetition, talk about it again and again from different angles. Make sure it's getting out there. And that means that you've got one project profile that you've now made work for 6 months to a year for you in content, all feeding from that one piece.
We have a little visual actually to help kind of talk through some of this. I do want to pull that up really quick for you guys, kind of showing what programming actually can look like. And of course, everybody's got marketing teams and so forth. And so not all of this is things that you are personally doing, although we have some marketing people in the room. And so it probably is. But just getting an understanding that, again, the idea is, yes, this might take a little bit more effort and work to really pull a story out rather than just giving a basic description. But if you do it right, it can turn into something that has many, 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 many legs that can last for many, many, many years. And so the effort becomes worth it because it's significant.
I wanted to just jump in and give a quick example of a project that we worked on with Bobcat, Compact Construction Equipment. They hired us to do a recruitment campaign where they sent us to all of the factories that they have across North America where they assemble the machines that end up on all the job sites. And we profiled 4 different people who worked at all these different factories. So everybody from like someone who worked in accounting in the office to a welder on the line to the guys wearing these big funny like bunny suits that paint the machines and stuff. It was really cool. But we shot that in 2021, right at the tail end of like quarantine and COVID and these types of factories, and they still post those videos today as if they're brand new. And so like leveraging those assets for years after the fact is kind of what I wanted to anchor on. And these are all just different examples of where these things can live. And from shooting, one interview with one of your principals, you can get content that can fit in every single one of these buckets. Pick little pieces, have a written piece here, a photo there, a video that turns into 5 videos somewhere else. Like, don't think of it as just the one deliverable that maybe you're targeting or maybe the one thing that somebody puts in front of you in a proposal. There's opportunity to stretch this stuff for years and years all across your different channels.
One more additional point too. We always say turn every video into a campaign. Well, how do you do that? That's hard to do if you're a small internal team. We're an external team, so we have a team of 5 here. And when we show up on a job shoot, we have 5 people operating a camera all day long. Some people are shooting interviews, some people are shooting photos, some people are shooting B-roll, and some people are getting drone shots. So with all that, you come home with all this footage and photos, and then what do you do with it? So instead of just making one video that you post one time on your LinkedIn and then it just kind of goes down we call it the internet garbage disposal. Nobody wants to spend that much time, energy, budget to try to make something that's just post and then it's gone. So how do you stretch those assets out? And what we like to think of is make your anchor video first. And your anchor video is your 2 to 5 minute brand anthem story that should probably live right on the homepage of your website and front and center on your LinkedIn page. That's where you really want to drive your customers to, and that should be the thing you're the most proud of and has your customer's voice, your voices from your executives, your people, boots on the ground making these beautiful building projects. And then from there, you're going to make several smaller cuts, like pull out like little 10, 15 second, sometimes 30-second chunks for different platforms, whether that's other social media channels, your pitch decks, wherever your customers are hanging out. That's really where you want to focus in. And then as well, having all that photography. Sometimes we come home from these job sites and we have 200 photos of this job site, just from everything from abstract shots to some of the building features, whatever. But that's a huge photo library that you have to post for months, if not years. So that's a really good tool to have. Is you're not just posting one video and then it's just kind of like, well, that's it. Move on to the next. You've got all these assets to kind of post across your channels throughout the pitch decks, websites, and really leverage those over a long period of time. That's really how you're going to get your most bang for the buck and the most leverage out of these projects.
That's great. So this question's specifically for you, Caitlin, as someone who helps implement this in many firms and helps operationalize things. What are some of the challenges you see firms come up against when they try to put this in practice?
If you thought talking about Yoda and Gandalf made me nerdy, strap in. We're going to talk about CRM systems, everyone's favorite topic. So this is a common problem, right? And so don't feel like I am talking specifically to you because we hear this daily. The structure, the operational infrastructure behind this is really where we see the challenge start to be painful, right? You know the project details that you worked on. You know the client pain point and challenge because you talk to them daily, but that lives in your head. Your marketing team doesn't know it. You can't go back and reference it. Some of us don't have great memories, so those fade over time and you're doing project after project. And so where we typically see firms fall down is the lack of a storage, a centralized hub, right, to record key information about a project above and beyond the square footage and the materials, right? That's all important too. But what was that initial client challenge? Why did they need you, right? Did they outgrow their campus? Did they have, again, another building that they were moving into that was slightly smaller footprint, so they needed to kind of reprogram everything? What was that initial client challenge that made them seek you out? What are some of the struggles that you had along the way, right? Because that is important to show how you pivoted, how you were able to work with them. And then what was some of the impact to it? What were they saying when they finally took hold of the space? And so those are the really key things to save over time. Other things like the actual team that worked on the project, right? I hear that constantly of like, it's this project, I don't know who worked on that, so I don't even know who to go to ask a question about it. So that's where CRM systems and what we call them knowledge management systems really come into play. So things like Deltek VantagePoint and Uninet and Open Asset, right, the ones you've heard, that can help you actually store this, and then around that you really do need the processes, and I'm not going to go into it. Again, if you're like me, we'll chat. But the things that help feed the report, the documentation of it when it's entered and whatnot. So that's one of the spaces that we see most people struggle with at the beginning. The other one, I think, is just the change in mindset of how you begin to talk about this, right? Again, your marketing team is not always in the room for these conversations, but they do have to be the ones that tell these stories for the most part. And so you being able to tell them what the problems of the project were helpful. So sometimes when we go into firms, we do interviews to pull that information out. And I'll never forget, we worked in an internal architecture firm, and I sat down and I said, okay, what was the challenge on this project? And the gentleman went, the circulation. And I was like, oh, okay. That was your challenge, maybe. Or maybe that was but help me understand that. What was the actual problem, right? Was it that people weren't able to collaborate with the groups that they needed to collaborate with because of the space, right? Let's dig into that a little bit deeper. So it's also training your mind to go back to the actual people challenge that you were designing for, to help the teams that you're working with in your marketing team really explain those projects in a more rich, relevant way.
What about on your end? Any challenges you guys see from a media standpoint for people implementing this?
Yeah, I think one thing that came up as you were talking, buy the rights to the stuff that you commission. I think a lot of architectural photographers will come in and they'll take a bunch of photos and then they'll license you all the images. That is like an ancient practice, and you should probably be thinking about, if you're spending a lot of money on this stuff, to own the rights to it, and then you can use it for a lot of other things afterwards. I think that it's a big leverage point, not only for you, but also all of your partners. Maybe thinking about sharing some of that cost. Your engineering firm friends, the developers, everybody else involved with the project, even the end customer, probably benefits from having some media throughout the course of the project. And you can see why certain decisions were made, instead of just having the finished images at the end that almost look like the renderings. You had the renderings from the beginning. Maybe there's a way to change that.
Another challenge that you guys might think about is like when you're starting on a new project. I know it's daunting. You guys are kind of like in the trenches. You're in the design phase. But maybe start thinking about what are going to be those key milestones that you really want to make sure you capture that wouldn't be a missed opportunity. The easy kind of no-brainers are like the groundbreaking, the topping out ceremony, the ribbon cuttings. Those are the moments that everyone's there to celebrate your work. So lean into that and plan for it. Plan on having a photographer there. Plan on capturing video if you can. Those are the moments that everybody's going to celebrate, so make them memorable and document them well.
So thinking ahead, right?
Yeah.
But at the beginning of the project, that's when you want to start telling the story, not at the end. But unfortunately, a lot of people and firms do. That's the point where they start thinking, okay, how are we going to talk about this? But you really need to start at the beginning. Caitlin, you had mentioned a couple of systems and tools, CRM, KMS, your favorite acronyms. But I'm curious, right, if those are the tools that help people collect this information, do they come out of the box with that functionality?
Yeah, no, unfortunately not. And look, no one likes databases. I don't like databases, right? They're never going to do what you need them to do, and more importantly, they're never going to actually enter the information, which is why we all don't like them. So what you need to do when you're thinking through your current CRM or looking for another CRM is to really understand, like, what do I actually need to know at the end about this? And then when you're looking at the design of that program or even just the fields that already exist, you do have to get creative about adding the things that you need. So I just finished a Deltek Vision to Vantage Point upgrade, and they took us through a rigorous design process with the Deltek team that asked, like, what are the fields that you need that are specific to your firm and the ways you're leveraging the information that don't come with just like the one that launches out of the box, as we say. The same is true for Uninet. The same is true for Open Asset, right? All of the ones that are really key to our industry do need to be tweaked again and finagled a little bit, right? Because all of your goals are slightly different. All of the things that you're trying to capture are different because of who you're working with, your vision, right? All the things we talked through. So important to really take a step back and understand how to build that right from the first time. Because the last thing you want to do is realize you weren't collecting that information for the last 5 years and now you can't actually leverage it.
So what would you guys say to the folks in the room who either don't have a marketing team, right? It's a 1-2 man shop or a very small firm, or the folks who are like, our marketing person should have been here, right? This doesn't apply to me. What would you say to those folks?
In this day and age, we're all brands. So your firm is a brand, but you are a brand too. And so it is a collaboration, right? We talk through it in the lens of a brand ambassador. And so I work at Anarche, right? And so I am posting on behalf of Anarche to my own accounts what I'm working on, why it's important to me, why the client needed it. And then Anarche is doing the same from the more official brand standpoint, right? That's how you leverage all of these tactics for yourself, right? To build your own expertise. I mean, the state of it is that hardly anybody stays at the same firm for, their entire career, right? So it helps you build your personal brand and your expertise and your portfolio and shows the value that you bring to your work above and beyond that. And because social media is what it is, right? Anytime you talk about something connected to your company, it boosts your company's ratings and your own too. So, and the interesting switch that we've recently seen, specifically on LinkedIn, is that LinkedIn's algorithm is favoring people accounts over the company accounts. And so if I post about a project, they're going to be more likely to share. That reach is going to be farther than if the Anarche account posts about a project. So you are an arm of your marketing team. Welcome. You're in marketing now. So you can be doing all of the things that we talked about to, again, help share that story to a wider audience. Plus, remember, they're your contacts, right? They're your relationships that you're building. So who better to have those conversations than you, who already have their challenges and their needs in mind?
Yeah, we're all living in this digital world that is not going to come any less digital in the future. So I would encourage small marketing teams we all have digital 4K cameras in our pockets now. So learn how to use it. There's plenty of good research you can do on like YouTube and Google searching about like how to do iPhone photography for architecture. I've actually spent some time learning that myself recently just to kind of have that knowledge. But start there. Just start documenting what you have. I mean, I'm sure there's people in this room that have worked on $100 million projects and they get to the end of it and what do they have to show for it? Maybe some out of focus iPhone photos. That's just kind of a shame and it feels like a missed opportunity. So I would just encourage you guys, if you're a small team, you don't have the resources, learn how to start shooting proper phone photography and videos and see where it goes. Interview your customers when they're excited, when they show up on the job site and they're happy with the results you provided. So just start learning how to use your phones and start there and then see where it takes you.
Yeah, and I would challenge you all to think about the rate at which you consume when you scroll. How fast is that? Do you guys think that your customers are like sitting around waiting for the next time that your firm posts?
We all
Probably
wish.
not, right? Just think about that a little bit. I bet that there's a number of people in here who are guilty on their company LinkedIn pages of posting pictures from like their Christmas party, and then the next post is like 6 months later, and it's like Jenny had a baby shower, and it's just like more team pictures. But you're not actually talking about your story, what makes you different, how you solved problems for your customers. It's more like a proof of life place to just show that you're still a company and that you exist. Think about that the next time that you have a meeting with your marketing department to say, how can we be using stuff that we already have, already own, things that are already on the site, and using them over and over and over again for years into the future.
I want to add one more thing to that too, because I think, again, the idea that your marketing team, if you have one, are the people who are responsible for this. And you alluded to this a little bit, Caitlin, is you have that client relationship. So in reality, you're the only person, if you worked on the project, who can get the information that can tell the story. So even if you're not the person who's necessarily putting all the information into the narrative, you have to infuse it. Your marketing team can't create that out of thin air. They're going to do the best with what they have, but in order for it to actually follow a true narrative, you have to get the information and translate it to a certain degree. And I know you guys also mentioned a couple of times, testimonials are gold, right? And so you're the one who has to get those testimonials from your clients. They're not going to just send that to your marketing team. I wish they would, right? That'd be amazing. But it's just not the reality. So this applies to everyone. Like Caitlin said, we're all walking brands this day and age. So I have one last question for everyone, and then we're going to break into a larger Q&A. So if you guys have had questions about the framework or want any questions specifically for this panel, start collecting those now. But my final question for the panelists is, what's one piece of advice you would share with someone in the audience who wants to apply this today?
I would say every company is a media company. And the examples I gave earlier of Lego and Red Bull, they're more B2C, and so it may be difficult for you to think about that as, well, I'm mostly B2B or whatever. But people buy from people, and as much work as we do on the brand, they want to buy into the story of you and the story of what makes you different, what makes your firm stand out. And that differentiator needs to be at the core of all of that messaging at the brand level, at your personal brand level, in what you post. Like, that's what's really going to make an impact.
Yeah, and I would just reiterate, like, if you don't know where to get started, just start documenting what you see out on the job site, document the work your team is doing behind the scenes in your office. Just start capturing content, and before you know it, you might be able to pull everything into a story, even if it's just a bunch of iPhone photos to start with. And then you work your way up, maybe you'll want to invest in doing more of like branded content styles using agencies. There's lots of opportunity for storytelling. And if you walk around this beautiful city, every building in this town has a story to be told, but if no one's there to document it, it feels like a missed opportunity. So I would just encourage everybody to pick up your cameras, pick up your phones, and start documenting what you're working on.
I would say know your audience. They tattoo that on us when we are in marketing school because it's one of the main tenets of it. But think through it this way, right? We all kind of understand the client challenges that are faced in each market, right? Because they're not overly unique. You kind of see them over and over again. And so if you're trying to work to reframe your own thinking in that, I always tell the story of the drill in marketing. So apologies if you've already heard this, but it's an old one. I didn't make it up. Guy goes to the store to buy a drill, but he's not buying a drill, right? He is, but that's not what he needs, right? What does he need? Why does anyone buy a drill? It's because they need a hole. They need to be able to drill a hole. But there's more to that, right? And so if you're trying to really understand your audience and their pain points and their problems and the challenges that they're trying to solve and their solution, you kind of have to keep asking yourself why along that journey. So why does someone need a hole? Okay, in this case, they could want to hang a picture on the wall. Okay, so now we've gotten to the what. Like, what do they need it for? But why? Like, why do they want to hang a picture on the wall? It's because they want to hang up their latest family portrait. Okay, so now we've gotten to the actual value and the impact. They want that memory in their home. That's the driver. That's the need. And so when you're thinking through, how do I tell my client's challenge, keep asking why. Why did they need that new campus? Why did they outgrow their old campus? What are they trying to do? Ask why and why and why until you get to that final driver. And that's the piece that resonates. Walter Hood said it so brilliantly this morning, right, is that tell our own stories. Help tell stories that your clients see themselves in, right? And it's starting with that why. So just keep asking yourself that and you'll finally get there.
Final thoughting parts before we go into Q&A, building off of what Caitlin just said is, I hear a lot of people sometimes say, well, it was just a project. It was a small project, it doesn't matter. The reality is everything that you guys work on has a story. They're not all going to be like these massive grandeur ones, but they have got a nugget in there, right? Otherwise, I don't know why you did the project. So just remember that the small projects also can be really compelling if the narrative is good. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and break into Q&A. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, fire them away.
I think with projects, there's like always so many people involved in the storytelling, and it sometimes can feel like when you're retelling something, you wonder, am I considering their perspective? Do I have permission to tell this challenge that we overcame and got through? What are some ways of navigating that?
It's a fantastic question. So, one of the things that I encourage people to do is, again, start early, right? You're going to want to tell a story. Start talking to the client about it immediately. Hey, we're going to document this project. Are you comfortable? Or if, as we go through the project, if there's anything specific you would like us to not include, and that way you're not asking them permission for everything. You're just saying, if there's anything you don't want me to say, let me know. So that's a way to manage it with a client. But it's great to include the full perspective, right? And so if you do have a marketing team, it's valuable to get them involved in figuring out, what's the engineer's perspective. I'm sure Linda over here with Newcomb and Boyd would appreciate that, right? They've got something to say about the project, and they value being able to be a part of that narrative too. And so it's great to include others. But most importantly, it's just important to share the narrative, right? So if that's a bottleneck, or you don't have the capacity to say, okay, I'm gonna reach out to the engineer, I'm gonna reach out to the landscape architect, I'm gonna reach out to all of the players, get the narrative down, and then you can share that with them, and they're gonna pull from it anyways, right? Like, this is just part of the nature of it. So, great, do it, but also if it's a hindrance, make sure you just get the story out there. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah. I was gonna say just ask. Yeah. Just ask. You'd be surprised what people would say yes to. And everybody benefits from this existing. The engineers benefit from it, the developers, the client. Maybe there's some semantics about things that they don't want to share or that they're not allowed to, or there might be NDAs involved, so just ask. And the worst thing they're going to say is no or divert you somewhere else, but we have interviewed thousands of people and asked hours, hundreds of thousands of hours of questions. You'd be amazed what people will tell you if you just ask. Yeah.
It's also a good thing to remember that you're not airing their dirty laundry, right? They're the hero in your story. So you are positioning them in a great light. The challenges that they have, they may feel like they're unique, but they're not. You've heard them from the previous two clients, right? And so it's about framing their challenge and their thinking and how unique they are, and you as a guide that help them get to that better world and now what they're able to do there. So they are going to come out of the other end looking fabulous, right? And they're not going to be sad that you wrote marketing material for them that they can then use and leverage. So you are helping them out and helping to promote who they are to a wider audience as well. They might help pay the bill. Yeah, there you go.
What's the downside of telling the story? So has there ever been a story where you told and instantly regretted it, or the perception that was received was different than the intent of the story?
I've never, no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to let them speak.
Yeah, you go for it.
Okay, I was going to say I'm sure that there are examples of this failing, but there's two sides to every story, and I think you have to allow yourself to let there be room for interpretation in some of this. And it's B2B. This stuff is relatively safe. Granted, if there's really extreme scenarios, there's bad things that can happen, or you may want to pull or divert. But generally, there's not a lot of downside to this. And I think that while I appreciate the challenge, I would just say, kind of reframe your thinking in why maybe do you feel apprehensive? Is it that you're afraid that something might go wrong on a job site, or you're afraid of how somebody might perceive it? If you are making a lot of stuff, ultimately it won't matter. Again, think about how fast you consume. Even stuff that's in the headlines, think about how fast it moves. People move on. So if something bad does happen, there's opportunity.
Another way to think about it too is that's essentially what editing is for, right? Edit out the bad stuff, keep the good stuff, right? Of course, there is extreme scenarios. If someone were to get injured on a job site, I get it, right? It can detract from wanting to tell that story. But again, I would just, you kind of have to take the bad with the good and tell the story. You want to shine positive light on your client's experience. You obviously don't want to lean into any negative things that might happen on a job site. So I would say edit appropriately.
I don't have an exact example of a time where it's gone bad, but I will say this kind of alludes to some of what we've talked about earlier, is not knowing your audience, right? So if you're telling a story that's focused on a pain point that literally is like, that's not relevant at all to me, well, then you're wasting your breath and your client's time. So the way I see you avoid that is by making sure you're not making assumptions about your clients, and that you're actually making sure that it's going to be something that resonates to something they're actually facing.
You've talked a lot about projects that are at completion or sort of the marketing stage of a project narrative. Probably most of us in this room tell stories to our clients every day, and we're sort of building the proverbial plane while we fly it, and we're kind of developing that story from our first handshake with the client through the visioning process, through the early concept, schematic. Just kind of curious to hear if you guys have any experience or have any good anecdotes that could give us a little bit of guidance on sort of how we tell those project stories kind of in real time while we're figuring out what those stories are.
That's a great question. I also just want to know, I like banana bits. I've never used that. I will from now on. That's really great. But in terms of going through the process and figuring it out in real time, I think that part of it is it's a conversation, right? And so a story can only be created if you actually engage and you're having a dialogue with someone. So asking the right questions along the way, and then also being able to tap into past experiences and past stories from other projects that may be relevant to them along that process. Because you're right, you're creating the story together, and then just documenting it as you go so you don't lose it by the end of the project and it's no longer relevant or not there in your head.
I would say it's about the reps and it's about practice. And you said that you tell these stories every day. You're kind of building the plane while you're flying it, and every time that you do that, you'll get a little bit better, a little bit sharper, a little bit more tactful in what language you use. And the more that you're involved in your niche, the easier those things then become. And it's ultimately just about reps.
You made me think of a real world example right now. We're working on a 36-month construction project in RTP for a biotech company. And this has been a really fun one for us. We're about halfway through this project. So the way we think about this is, the preliminary meetings before there was even the site was cleared, we filmed meetings with the client, meeting with the construction architect team, just kind of like behind the scenes, see the schematics and the CAD drawings, et cetera. So we documented that early steps, and then everything from the site getting cleared. We have several time-lapse cameras going for 3 full years just to show the transition from dirt to finished product. And then we do monthly site visits, once a month for 36 months to capture ground cam photography and drone of the site at least once a month. So I think maybe figure out the appropriate cadence that you would like to document that type of stuff and what type of documentation you want to do. And it's one of those things like we're shooting so much content for so long that at the end we have this mountain of footage and photography that we can kind of show this whole transformation. We're going to take our time and edit it probably into like a 15 to 20 minute documentary when it's all said and done. But along the way, to kind of give the client, we do like quarterly progress updates. They could be anywhere from like 30 seconds to 2 minutes long, just to kind of show like what the current status of the project is. And that's something the client is excited to see. All the partners involved are excited to share. And it's just kind of good for like brand awareness, project awareness. Share that story with the community, what you're building.
I would also say that the framework we showed is the full story, right? And if your example's beautiful, if sometimes you're just telling chapters at a time. So stay focused on where you are in that journey with the client, right? And then remember the two things, the initial challenge and the pain point and the better worlds, because that's what you have to keep drawing back to, right? It is everyone's human nature. We see it with clients all the time. We identify a plan, we're about to move forward, and something else happens, and it's like, oh, should we change direction? Well, let's see. What was the initial challenge? What's that better world? Does it still get us there, right? It's those two pieces that you need to make sure that you're inside of. And then you're either building trust, you're credentialing yourself. It just kind of depends on the project phase and how you need to move forward. But initial issue, better world are your two bookends there.
Specifically for the NRK folks, as business marketers, you could have chosen many industries to form a business around. Why did you choose A&E? Is it because we're so poor at this?
We like a really good challenge. No, I mean, I'll let Caitlin speak to this too, because she's a little bit newer than I am to this space. Yes, there's absolutely a need that we recognized needed to be filled. But also, I spoke about this a little bit before the keynote session. It is incredible to me what you guys are doing, right? The work you're doing impacts everything we touch. And I didn't know anything about this industry until I, by happenstance, fell into it. And I was blown away, like, why as a just general human being didn't I know anything about architects, anything about engineers, anything about the built environment? That's silly. Like, I touch it all the time. And so to me, it was like a little bit of an injustice that I wanted to solve, and I want to help you guys solve it because people should know what you do.
I've bounced around from industry to industry. I've worked in makeup, and then I went to trucking, which most people do. And then I found Des. And you guys are not the worst at it, right? If we want to talk about my association days, oh boy, lack of storytelling there. Again, trucking. But I'm an indoor cat. Right? I'm not the person that's like living my life outside, right? I enjoy restaurants. I enjoy my home. I enjoy spaces like this, right? I live my life in what you do. And I equally was as surprised that I'm not really even aware of it, right? And so it's the amount of day-to-day influence you have on how I feel and how comfortable I am and the vibe that I'm absorbing. That is something that I think deserves to be told more. And so of all of the marketing that's out there that is just noise to me, this is one that I actually feel like deserves to be elevated beyond anything else. And so that's why I'm still here. Also, trucking's boring.
This
You
is the
didn't
last
ask us,
question.
but construction's cool. So we like construction.
I'm sorry, I just have to throw this one last nugget before we go to the last question, aligned with this, because Will's wife, we got to meet yesterday, and she's a really, really lovely woman, but she also is in marketing, not in this space, and we were talking about this very topic, and she brought up yesterday that first stint, she's no longer doing this, don't worry, had to promote a shelf-stable egg omelet. And so she's going through this process of how she has to, pretend this thing is amazing and take different pictures of it. That sounds terrible, right? So, egg omelets or the AE space, I guess we'll choose the AE space.
And I was just told this is the last question.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for spending 90 minutes with us talking about storytelling. We really, really appreciate you, and we'll see you at the rest of the conference. Pass it.
Yes. Thank you so much to Des, Will, Ryan, and Caitlin for the presentation. Thank you to the South Carolina Architectural Foundation for sponsoring the lecture, and thank you all for coming. If you have comments, please go into your app. There's a place to do that. It'll help us improve our sessions in the future. Thank you so much.